biggest thing is the ability to make an impact.
From that moment onwards, we moved from being a brand that advertised to a brand that communicated.
We collaborate with our clients, and over time, we try and get them to fire us.
You must have to have really difficult conversations.
I want to see no office wall. I want to see everything covered in ideas.
There's so much data available that you can kind of get dazzled by it. And
What the hell are you doing?
Hello everyone, my name's Katie Sando and welcome to the Marketing Forum podcast. Today we are joined by Iain McDonald. Iain is Head of Digital at Create, the brand studio for CNN International Commercial, where he leads a global team of digital creatives, producing branded content experiences for some of the largest advertisers in the tech, auto, travel, luxury, and B2B sectors, and a lot more besides. Before joining CNN, he was director of Quartz Creative, an associate content director at Publicis Media, and a content manager with Marks and Spencer's. Iain studied sound engineering and production at Birmingham University before training in journalism at Falmouth University, which presumably, if I'm not mistaken, Iain, sent you off down a content production path.
Yeah, it kind of did. Thank you very much for having me, by the way. Yes,
thank you for joining us.
Yeah, the link from sound engineering to content production is a bit of an odd one, but one that does kind of make sense. I finished university doing my undergrad degree and thought, you know what, I never want to do that again. So did the natural thing and moved to Tokyo.
Sure.
I lived in Tokyo for a year where I started teaching English and then kind of realized actually I quite like the language. It's quite a good one. So then went back to study broadcast journalism, linking the sort of the sound engineering side for radio. However, never really ended up in radio, and through serendipity, I guess, ended up in the digital content production space, and I've been doing that for far too long now.
So when you said you like the language, you mean you like Japanese?
No, English. No, I largely spoke English while I was there. My Japanese is very, very bad.
I was going to say, to be fair, if you'd managed to go from naught to full Japanese in a year, then you're in the minority, I believe.
Oh, absolutely. It was very, very strategically used Japanese. I couldn't direct you to a train station, but I could argue a gas bill over the phone. It's you learn through necessity. Absolutely.
We've all been there, though. So your background's really interesting. So I can see, obviously, going from journalism and then presumably even production was quite useful in terms of what you're doing now. So, obviously sound engineering probably is not that useful, but those kind of production skills must be really useful in the kind of work that you're delivering at the moment.
Absolutely. And what I would also say is more recently, and the reason why we're here, the sort of the golden age of podcasting is upon us, and sort of more recently within some of the clients I've been working on, it's a heavy focus. So actually, while it may seem like a random skill I have, the sound engineering is very much being used at the moment, surprisingly, which I never thought would happen. I
find it depressing, as opposed to anything else, how many podcasts there are.
Oh, there are a lot out there. And I think it's finding the gold is always quite a challenge. I think with that, though, there is a strategy behind the podcast and getting a reason for people to listen and a reason for people to keep listening as well, and engaging people. I think one of the challenges we face a lot is a client wants a podcast because everyone else has a podcast, and there's not necessarily a reason to be doing one. So a lot of the work I do in that space is strategically trying to find a reason why you would do a podcast and why someone would listen, and moreover why someone would keep listening, because it's a slow burning medium, right? You've got a display ad, it's there, it's in your face, you've got your message, whereas a podcast, it's not a sales tool, it's more of a brand building tool, and it's more of a tool that takes time and builds over a sustained period.
I find it really interesting because I was just having a look around and seeing what other marketing podcasts were out there, and so when you start looking, it's overwhelming because there's a lot. But the ones that are really well listened to are very in the minority, because the majority of people, I would guess from what I've seen, look like they're listening to more like lifestyle podcasts, you know, they've got more of a broader point of interest. But also then it's quite reassuring because when you dig into those podcasts, there's a lot of have recorded, say, 5 episodes, 10 episodes, and it was clearly something that people just kind of did a little bit of a test the water kind of scenario and haven't kept going with. I think there's a stamina that needs to come with podcasting for sure.
This is one of the things I tell my clients constantly is, yes, you need to be in it for the long haul. Doing 2 or 3 episodes to test the water is not necessarily the best way to go about it. And I think while there are a lot of podcasts that grow organically through shared interests and having some form of utility, a lot of them, there's a lot of legwork in getting the listeners and getting them up to a point where people would or clients would deem them successful. And with that comes a lot of paid media that sits alongside it. So while it may seem a bit grassroots, to have the production quality that you'd require from one of the world's largest advertisers, there needs to be a fairly hefty investment alongside it in terms of traffic driving and getting people to listen.
And there's a lot of like production. There's a lot of, what's the word, I suppose, like production companies and celebrities getting in, which are going to completely crash out over the more grassroots ones because they've already got the audience.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think is key is the host, such as yourself, and having someone that's engaging. But I think moreover for brands getting into the space, people are very aware that something is advertising, and that immediately puts you on the back foot. So having a host that has a built-in audience with them, I think when sort of developing these things is of the utmost importance.
It's so interesting though, because so one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is the fact that when we talk about content, the breadth of that now is huge. You know, it's no longer a kind of I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when we used to think about content, we used to think about written content, even digitally. And then that's kind of moved into, visual, film, video, podcast. Like what else is it literally huge now that you're trying to deal with?
Absolutely. I think, when I started out, it was literally, let's just put a blog post up about something. And that was largely
the days.
largely driven by an SEO team. And now content and branded content in particular is becoming so much more important. Yet, as you say, there's so much out there. Cutting through the noise is becoming ever more important. My role and Create at CNN is effectively, we are one team, but split into 2 sorts of disciplines. There's the digital side, which handles sort of everything bar video production. And then we have our video production team. Being born out of CNN, obviously a TV channel, that is sort of a core and very established part. But the digital side is relatively new. And with that comes a sort of broad landscape with which to explore. So yes, there is a lot of written content, and we do a hell of a lot of video content and incorporating that on site, but moving things forward into 360 video. One of the things at the start of the pandemic that we really started to explore with earnest was AR and augmented reality. A large sort of part of my client base at CNN is international tourist boards. And as soon as the pandemic hit and people couldn't travel anymore, they were sort of looking to pivot their message to say, come back when you can, but how do you stay top of mind? And one of the things we explored for a number of clients was augmented reality, as now everyone has a phone in their hand that is capable of showing and displaying augmented reality. We've also done a sort of a little look into virtual reality as well. But I think personally, in the branded space, unless you are trying to meet a very specific objectives, people just don't have the hardware to be able to do it. So you limit your audience. Whereas, so that's one of the sort of things we've been looking at. We've talked about audio. And within that, there's sort of mixed media experiences we're looking at as well, where it's sort of a traditional site that brings in all forms of soundscapes and animation and even sort of comic book style storytelling into these in order to tell a story in a way that resonates with the right people in the right way.
How do these clients normally start engaging with you then? Are they CNN? Are they CNN clients that then it moves into more content production, or do you work very much like an agency?
So all of our clients are CNN clients. They're all with us to be on CNN channels, be that on TV, be that on digital, be that on social, or any of our other sort of platforms. We work in two ways. One is client direct relationships, where our sales team either actively seek them out or they come to us actively wanting to be on CNN. CNN is what's known as pan-regional, so it's not like a BBC or a BBC News in the UK specifically, or any of your sort of national TV stations. Our feeds are split down the globe. And so we've got the EMEA feed that covers everything from Europe, Middle East, Africa. We've got the APAC feed that does there. We've got the LATAM feed. And so we cover vast swathes of people. So we are a very effective tool for international brands to cover a large amount of people. So they often come to us direct. And then the final method is through media agencies such as Publicis Media or Wavemaker or agencies like that.
And then do you get this kind of brief? Is it sort of like the client says, this is what we're trying to achieve, pitch us?
Absolutely. So they will say, hey, we've got a new product to launch. We want to drive tourism to this part of our country. We want to make people aware of this service we offer. We are doing just a broad branding piece sometimes, and we will, as a team, receive a brief. That can be anything from we kind of want to do this, but we're not really sure, right the way down to this is what we're trying to achieve, this is what we want to do, and these are the formats we want to use.
Okay.
It really depends. It's not at one specific industry will be a bit broader than the other. It really depends on the client. And then our team of strategists and content strategists will look at that, figure out the best channels that we have at our disposal to use, be that TV, be that online, be that social, and then look at the best method for telling the story.
Sure.
We at CNN have a specific way of telling stories. We always like to make them human focused and human centric, because intrinsically as people we like to hear about these things and we like to feel something. With good content always has to have some reason for being there. It has to make you feel something. It has to make you smarter. It has to make you provide utility. It has to do something, or people just won't interact with it. And so depending on what we're trying to achieve, we'll look at the right medium and then the right story that goes alongside that. And oftentimes that's not a specific sales message. While branded content, if you think of traditional marketing 101, where you've got your sort of funnel of users from awareness to consideration right the way down to purchase, branded content is not great at the lower end of the funnel. Okay. It's not a blunt stick. It's not buy this. It's not that at all. So depending on what we're trying to achieve, we look at the right medium further up, and it's largely around either awareness of a product or sort of like I say, a broader branding piece that makes the brand top of mind later down the line.
And how much in that kind of process, how much of it is driven by sort of the in-house marketing teams at the client, at the brand? And with particularly, I suppose, around when you get to the point of delivering creative, is that coming from them? Are you guys having to create that, and then that's a sign-off procedure with the client? I'm just really interested, because when you're working with big advertisers, there's a lot of that brand piece is highly protected.
There is. So everything we do is created by us, and throughout my career, it's all largely been created by the teams I've been working in. When you're looking at sort of branded content on a publisher's platforms, you've got a sort of balancing act between client branding, but also keeping your own tone of voice and your own branding and your own house style. Because when you skew too far one way, and particularly too far to the client's branding, it just becomes an ad for whatever, and people are very susceptible of that. And I'm not saying we are trying to convince people that this is content by CNN editorial. No, we're very clear on that. We have a lot of signposts everywhere that this is a paid for piece, but we do want to make it feel native and integrated into our experience, because that's where we know people will engage with it more, because it feels like you are following a familiar user journey. If you're on a site and you're clicking on a piece of editorial, you know you're going to go to a story about that. If you click on a piece of our branded content, you know that it's going to feel very similar and be part of an experience. And that's for very good reason. You've got to sort of think of the user and where they are at that moment in time. They're not going on to CNN to read, to look at a load of advertising. They're going on to read the news and be informed. And what we actually do when crafting content is take a lot from the editorial style guide and broader journalism principles. We deliberately don't write pages and pages and pages of long things, because more often than not, you're on CNN to just check the news, see what's going on, maybe read a couple of hundred words on each article. So we try to ensure that that's consistent, so you're not creating a jarring experience for the user. And if you're creating a piece that's heavily branded and heavily sort of pushy towards a sales focus, it just doesn't work and people just don't engage. And at that point, you've spent, or the client has spent, a large amount of money producing something that nobody wants to see or interact with. So it's that constant balancing act. But then on the other way, we don't want to go too far down the CNN route, because you lose the identity of the brand, but then also you stray into territory of what is this, and respect for the user is of utmost importance, right? So we always ensure, like I say, there are signposts everywhere clearly marking this as a sponsored piece. So it can be a bit of a balancing act, and some clients will often want to push slightly harder down the route of their own branding, but then it just involves a conversation of, look, this is why we are doing this is why we are proposing it. We know our audience, and everything we do, we keep our audience in mind, and we hold a lot of first-party data about our audience that allows us to understand them and to know them and to craft stories that will resonate with them, which ultimately is better for the client.
I definitely think there's people are so savvy now. It's so easy, and you see it on social media, don't you, when people tip themselves over the edge of that line and they go from this, we're here for the audience, and then they do like an ad post, and it's so addy that they just get ripped to shreds.
Absolutely.
But I just think, you can never underestimate. I do think sometimes brands and companies underestimate their audience, and it's, I think, a really good lesson. Your audience is not a fool.
Absolutely. And as you say, they're becoming increasingly savvy as the market becomes increasingly saturated with branded content. And then for me, it does come back to that moment of what is in it for the audience. Just because it's an ad, just because a brand is saying something, doesn't mean to say it isn't important or interesting. And so it's finding that reason and that angle to tell a brand story that makes sense to someone. And one motto I always use when looking at this, I stole this from someone. It might have been someone at Facebook. I don't know. I've been using it for years, so apologies if the originator of this is listening. But that my sort of litmus test, I guess, for creating anything is why share and why care. And if you can't answer either one of those, it's not the right kind of story.
Does that mean you sometimes probably really need to do you ever turn partnerships down if you're just like, guys, you really have nothing to say here?
No, because I always think there is something in there to find. Sometimes it can be buried deeper than others. But I think, again, I coming up with some awful sound bites here, but one of my first ever creative directors always used to say, you are never the audience. So just because you find it interesting or not interesting doesn't mean that someone else won't.
Sure.
So it's just a case of digging in. And even when you think you're the audience, you're not. And so it's really what is there that someone might find interesting that has that connection that provides value.
That's so interesting. And are you allowed to share any of the stories around some of the campaigns that you've worked on with clients, or is that highly confidential and not something we can talk about?
I think I certainly can't go into vast amounts of detail. That is confidential, but I can certainly talk about a few of the more interesting top line ones we've done recently. Yeah. I think one of the ones that I'm particularly proud of is one that came out of a pivot from COVID-19. We've been working with the Ministry of Tourism for India for quite some time, creating campaigns for those guys. And we had a big plan to time is a concertina of nothingness at the moment. We are 2021 right now, aren't we? Yeah, we're not. Yeah. So this was 2020. We're nearing the end. So this was 2020, and we had this grand idea. We've been working with some with talent, one Indian, one South African, who created a lot of content for us around different regions of India, talking about their personal experiences, but they'd never actually met. So we had this big plan at the beginning of 2020 of those guys sort of meeting back up in India and creating some beautiful content. Obviously, the pandemic hit. People couldn't travel. There were strict lockdown measures in India, and the client then realized we're going to have to change what we're doing. So actually, what we started to do was use some of our talent we had in India to write a few pieces and do some Instagram lives around all the things they love in India, and have it as almost like a love letter to domestic travel. And with that, using a lot of archive photography and personal stories and personal anecdotes, and creating personal sort of road trip itineraries, we actually managed to produce a really, really nice piece of content that resonated well with the domestic Indian audience through sort of very limited means, I guess, in terms of being actually able to go out and shoot and travel. I think I'm trying to think if there's any other particular pieces we've done recently that are particularly worth talking about here.
I'm trying to like untangle my dog from the wire. If
I think one of the ones that I'm particularly proud of more recently is work we've done with Samsung out of our APAC office. We have produced a piece with a sign language interpreter who came to prominence signing live performances of songs. And creating a piece around him, which has been particularly well received.
It's in my head, and so I'm thinking I've got so many questions for you. So, have you kind of got in your head like a list of what these channels look like? So when you're thinking about content now, because it's so broad, so do you include? So it sounds to me like you would include social media and influencers / ambassadors.
It's actually quite rare we include influencers or ambassadors. We prefer to have a more organic story or an organic story. And a great example of this is a campaign we did a number of years ago for Dangote, who are a sort of a Nigerian conglomerate that does everything from sort of concrete to all sorts of different things. And there we looked at this road they are building through Nigeria that traditionally was a very sort of dangerous place. It was unpaved, and now they've built this road going through that has just revived all the areas along it. And actually, how do you tell that story? Certainly, influence is not right. You want to get sort of the story on the ground. So we told it from two angles. We told it from the angle of the engineer who was designing and building the road, but also from the angle of a lady called Halima, who was one of the first female truck drivers in Nigeria, and telling her story about what it means for her to be able to break gender barriers, but also be able to earn enough money to send their kids to school, and the impact that this road has on the individual person. So we try not to go down the influencer route. We have done it, and if it's right for the campaign, we do it, but we try to find something that's slightly more grassroots, I guess. But to your point around which sort of platform we choose when we're doing this, we rarely pick just one. We will create. We've got this overarching message, and we will look to tell it across a number of different platforms. But then the media we're putting out on those platforms is very, very different. So you could be doing an instant experience, giving a top line short snippet of a story on Facebook, because when you're scrolling, you don't necessarily want a long piece to go through. No. But then on the site, we might tell it in a video augmented with images and copy, and then we might take a snippet of that and use that in a short form sort of storytelling podcast ad, for example, and take a bit of an interview with someone and sort of bookend a podcast at the beginning and the middle and the end with a bit of a linear story that's still advertising, but is providing value and actually providing interest.
So do you think this is an approach that maybe even in-house marketers should be looking at taking around?
Absolutely.
Yeah, like, who should be telling stories within business and within your client?
Absolutely.
Within your brand?
I think it's a tricky one, this, particularly in small businesses. I think it depends what you're ultimately trying to achieve. Having the CEO talking about what they're doing might be right for some people. It might not be right. Having case studies put out, again, using the client's voice might be right, or it might not. It depends what you're trying to achieve. And it's actually a quite difficult thing to put a yes, do this or don't do that on, because it varies so much by interest and sure. what people are into and what you're trying to achieve. So, but I think always thinking about the end user and that connection with them and what will make them come back to your brand at a later date, I think is the important piece. I also think, again, platform as well. Don't expect that a time poor audience is going to spend 35 minutes engaging with all forms of infographic and video and text on a very long scrolling page. You need to think about the moment they are in when they are likely to be discovering your content. And the easy way to do that is what moment would you be in? I know earlier I said you are never the audience, but you can be a good litmus test for human behavior. We're all sure. humans after all. So it's what would you be expecting if you're trying to find a solution or come across something?
I had an experience recently where I was having a conversation with someone and they were trying to make people read. So they had kind of formatted their channel because they wanted people to read whole articles. And it was quite a difficult conversation, really, because I personally think if you're trying to create digital content, you have to therefore be prepared that people are going to behave in a digital way. And therefore, it's unlikely, they were creating a kind of a complex system which forced people to read everything, as opposed to simplifying it, knowing that people would only read maybe the first couple of paragraphs.
Absolutely. One of the things that I am a firm believer in is especially in written word, is you shouldn't have any throat clearing. You all know when you read a piece at the start, it's like in 1542. No, get to the point.
Yeah.
Like, this is the reason why you're here. Don't bother clearing your throat. Just get to the point. Get your bit out first. Get the payout of the story at the top. Get what you want people to understand at the top, and then expand on it further down.
That's
and it's not
journalism.
necessarily. It certainly is. It certainly is. And it's not something that all sort of news publications do, but I think it is very important because, as you say, you can't expect people to sit down and read 4 or 5 articles about something that they're probably not actively looking for. They've stumbled across it, and you need to.
But I also think that if you're going to engage, if people engage with print differently, don't they? Like, that's what the data shows.
They do.
You can't
yes.
expect them to. You can't create a system which forces them to think about what they're reading online as print when they're online. So I think it's like, I think you have to respect the choices of the audience.
Absolutely. While print, you can turn the page. Online, you've got Slack messages coming in, you've got emails coming in, you're one swipe away from something else and reading another bit of content. So that grabbing the attention, but doing it in a genuine way, not in a clickbaity way, I think, is very important.
One of the other things I wanted to ask you about, so we were talking about podcasts at the beginning, but so when you talk about clients wanting podcast, as in they want to be on your, like, the CNN podcast?
So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So obviously CNN editorial has their own roster of podcasts. We've had a couple of number 1 podcasts as well in various charts. And there are clients that want to align their messages with those. And they are more on the direct advertising side. So not necessarily enter an offer code to get money off. It's more of getting a broader understanding of a client's brand in there. And the way we do those is it's podcast ads, as we all know and have heard. But we try to include a story arc throughout them, and try to include, just like we do in digital content, you have a beginning, middle, and end, and you want an emotional connection, and you want people to feel like they are gaining something from it, even though it is an ad. And so, yes, we do those within the editorial podcast, but then also oftentimes they are looking for a production partner who has a storytelling framework and knowledge and experience to create a completely branded and owned podcast by them.
So you guys would then work with them on multiple episodes, like long term? Absolutely. We are a sort of full service shop. So everything from ideation to research to talent sourcing, recording, editing, distribution. We do all of that. What does your day-to-day look like then? Because it's you're going to say every day is different.
Schizophrenic is probably the answer. And I mean that because me and my team work across, we're not structured in a way that you only do auto, you only do tech, you only do that. We do work across everything. And it means our team is great in pub quizzes, because you have to become an instant expert on something very niche, and then 5 minutes later you're looking at something else. So the day is really very varied. It's everything that there is a lot of sort of signing of concepts, developing sort of concepts, working with developers and my team all over the world to build sites and build experiences. But then there is also the element of having to get a very deep understanding of a lot of very separate things. To give you an example, over the last few weeks, I've had to have a thorough understanding of the production of Scotch whiskey, of hydroelectric power in Latin America, of the tourbillon watch movement, which is a very specific complication in watches that was developed 220 years ago, right the way through to what else have we been looking at recently? Human psychology around chatting online through video conferencing. So my day is there's never a dull day. Put it
like
that
a
way.
Wikipedia.
Yeah, it really. I really. Some of the things I'll suddenly come out with that have been stored back from way back when in my head. I surprise myself sometimes. So, in terms of a day structure, there is a lot of developing concepts, signing off concepts the team has developed, signing off visuals, signing off user experience. User experience is something I'm really quite hot on in terms of creating a nice and cogent journey for readers. But then there's also, yeah, like I say, having to become experts in a lot of disparate topics.
It's so funny, the watches. I've always loved Vanity Fair. And,
right.
I don't know if you've ever read it, but they do sort of like additional issues through the year. And one of them is always Vanity Fair on Time. And,
Okay.
It's like the world of luxury watches. And every time I like have a flick through that magazine, there's always an article which talks about like how watches work. And I'm always like, nope, like my brain can't cope with that. I don't want to know how watches work.
I've had the luxury of working with a number of very, very, very high-end watch brands and spoken to a number of their people internally. I spoke with a man a while ago who has the great title Head of Complications. They're the little fun things in watches. So while I wouldn't claim to be an expert, I could walk you through the basics, I think of how a watch works.
I want to protect the magic. I just can't cope with it at the moment, but that's fine. I'm sure I'll get onto it. Content strategies. I'm really interested in your take. I totally appreciate that it's so different for all clients, like what they're trying to achieve, etc., and what their brand's about. But is there sort of is there kind of a consistency of approach that you might take across the board in terms of just like starting to understand what that might develop into?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it is the audience every time, and it's understanding your audience, and that isn't just what they like and what they don't like, although that is highly important. It's also understanding the sort of periphery of things that make them tick and interest them. So while you could be talking about a car, for example, people just don't like cars. People who like cars also like food or sport or things like that. And it's looking at their passion points around that and how you can tie that into a story to make it more relevant to someone. I also think understanding the audience is understanding where they are and what they do on these platforms and why they are on those platforms. So a B2B message on Facebook might work, but actually is that better placed on LinkedIn because they're on Facebook, no doubt, at 2 a.m. in the afternoon after sort of a carb heavy lunch, just trying to get a bit of an escape before going back to a relentless inbox. So it's knowing where your audience are at what time and why they are there, and then tailoring those messages to it, I think. So it's understanding the audience from a platform perspective, from an intent perspective, but also from quite a personal perspective as what they like.
One of the things with audience I think is really challenges is, so do your clients come to you with a lot of detail about their audience? Because I think one of the challenges with SME is that you might know your audience more intimately than in a corporate because you're closer to them, but you might not have that much data.
So you'd be surprised, actually, when we get a target audience, it's often not that specific. It will be it will be business decision makers aged 35 to 49, for example. Right. And that's what we get. Not
bringing in like a cardboard cutout of Barry and saying, "This is Barry, married, 2 kids."
We have had that. We've never had I'll be honest, I've never had a cardboard cutout yet, but there's always time. No, we do occasionally get more specific sort of pen portraits of segments, but it tends to be fairly broad.
Okay.
I think more so at CNN, and I think that is down to the fact we are, as I mentioned earlier, pan-regional. So we're potentially a broader brushstroke in terms of a marketing effort for certain types of clients. Certainly in previous roles I've had, certainly at courts or 100% at publicists, there you do get more detail, but largely the understanding of the audience comes from first-party data that we have. So we know that we have these segments of people. We know the sorts of people that will interact with different types of content or sections on the site, and are able to target that way. I think for SMEs, yes, you might have that sort of greater sort of personal connection, I guess, with the audience, but that doesn't mean to say there isn't data points out there that you can't augment what you're looking to achieve with. I think certainly, I mean, a great start, for example, is Google Trends and things like that, where you can just see what people are searching, how you should be framing your story, and then broader. There's all forms of data out there from, be it Global Web Index, or again, Google's a great source of it, where you can start to build up a bit of a data set of sort of ideas to try, I guess, because while they may not marry perfectly with your audience, there's certainly points there, and certainly jumping off points that allow you, from a content perspective, very quickly and easily, and most importantly cheaply, to try. Because a lot of content, unlike what we were saying about podcasts being a slow burning sort of medium at the very top of this, there are areas in content marketing that are very easily done and can show some very quick results.
So back to the strategic approach. So start with audience always, and really get to understand those what they might be interested in and their needs, etc., etc. Stage 2.
Okay, so stage 2 is looking at what the brand is trying to achieve. More often than not, you've got at one end of a spectrum what the brand is trying to achieve. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got what the audience wants and what makes them tick. If you assume we've now, through our understanding of our audience, got the kind of platforms we know that they are on, we can start to shape what we're thinking. And our job, and our strategist's job, and a content marketer's job, is to reduce the gulf between what the audience wants and what the brand is trying to say. CNN's way of doing that is always finding the human in the middle, as I mentioned, to try and tell that story. While that's not always possible, there are certain tricks you can sort of do to narrow that gap. It's also, I think, very important to know where to use content marketing and where not to use content marketing, because I do believe there's a big difference between your sort of paid for in-feed ads on social, your display ads, your PPC, all of that. That I do not consider content marketing. Even your pre-roll on YouTube or whatever, I don't necessarily think as content marketing. I think YouTube might disagree, and I think there is a way you can use pre-roll as content marketing, but I see that as more of an advertising buy and not developing a connection. So it's looking at what your brand stands for and what you want to be known for, and finding your voice there and telling that in a way that will appeal to the audience. And by doing that, you can kind of close that gap of sort of the audience not caring and not engaging, just by listening to them. Because at the end of the day, your audience are your most important people.
Sure. And then from there, you would take that into the a creative concept of, so what's the best strategy, what's the best mix of channel, platform, creative. Absolutely,
yes. So once we've done all that, we will put together a proposal back to the client that says, you're trying to achieve this. This is what we know about our audience. This is what we are proposing. There will be X amount of films. There'll be X amount of articles. There will be used on these different channels. On CNN, we specifically say that it will be promoted around CNN business, or it'll be promoted around CNN style, depending on what will resonate. And then that's delivered back to the client, along with a media plan that is dictated by spend. And then in an ideal world, the client's like, yeah, love it, go. At that point, we have a more in-depth look at the stories and what's been proposed. Well, if we are using talent, for example, we don't contact talent before pitch is signed off. And so we'll put proposed talent in there, but that might change throughout, and there'll be a negotiation process there. And once we sort of entered that, it is a partnership with the client. We work together to develop these stories. They're all produced by us and produced in-house, but the client has a voice. I think that's that's quite key. That's the difference between sponsored editorial, where you have a program that's brought to you by client, and they have no say in the making of the program, versus what we do, where the client can have a say in the making of it. And we work together using our knowledge of the audience and what they're trying to achieve to craft the message in a way that we're all happy with.
Sure. It's way more of a partnership.
Absolutely. It's much more of a partnership. And then we create it. It's all signed off. Everyone's happy. It goes live. The audience loves it. It's wonderful. And we continue working together for the next, God knows how long.
Years.
Absolutely.
What a happy story.
What a happy story.
So I kind of want to, I know that you probably didn't mean it like that, but so I think there's the people with content marketing that are like, yep, works so well. I get it. We use it a lot. And then I think there's the people that are like, not so sure. And you could probably say that, to be honest, about any form of marketing. However, do you think there is times where content marketing doesn't work? Where do you think it really specifically works? And, or do you just think it always works? And if people don't think it works, they're not thinking about it clearly enough.
I would say yes and no to all of those. So where do I think it doesn't particularly work? I think it doesn't particularly work as a direct sales message. People don't want to engage with that. And I think if you're trying to really improve sort of lower funnel conversion and things like that, content marketing is not necessarily your strongest place to do that, with one exception. If you are going to include that in content marketing, which is influencer marketing, personally I don't think of that as part of the core of content marketing. I think it was, but it's kind of separated out into its own beast now.
More of a channel, isn't it?
It is. And then in terms of where it particularly works, I think it's the upper piece around awareness and branding and broader just acknowledgement that something's out there and sort of exists. And then to your point around those people that are doing it, but they're not seeing the value, it could be that genuinely, yes, you're doing it, you don't see the value, you have better converting channels for doing what you need to do. Or it could be the fact that you are not being mindful of the audience, because I mean, I've said it so many times on this, but it all comes back to the audience, right?
Yeah. Because obviously it's quite different, I suppose, content marketing on your own channels versus, it's the same principle, but it's a different approach. And I think it's easy to get lost in what people care about when you're on your own channels saying what you care about.
Absolutely. And it goes back to, you are never the audience. Just because you're pulling it together, just because you care about something might not be what your audience cares about. And for SMEs, where, as you say, they do have a bit more of an understanding of what makes their audience tick, it can be easier. But on the same tone, if you're all kind of thinking along the same lines, it can be harder as well to separate yourself from that. So I do think it's always best to get and obviously this is easier said than done, but it's always best to get a third party to look at it, because they can come with a completely fresh set of eyes that aren't tainted by any sort of internal bureaucracy or history or anything like that, to look at it and say, this is what you should be doing, this is what we think will work. And that doesn't have to be an agency, that doesn't have to be a costly third party agency. It could be a freelance copywriter that comes in just to have a look and say, like, this is the story you should be telling.
Yeah.
Any sort of copywriter worth their salt will be able to look at a broad set of seemingly disparate goals and materials and say, this is where your sweet spot is. This is the story that will go out. And I think, yeah, it always helps to get someone with a fresh set of set of eyes in.
I think where it can go wrong a lot in SME is around we've got this set of messages, this is what we want to say. And you said around the fact that with your work, you guys can come in and say, actually, this is turning it into an advert. You've got to be, you've got to pull back a little bit. I think that's what's harder in an SME is that if it's like, right, we need to get these messages in, your content can just turn into a series of adverts because
absolutely.
You've not got anyone that's that voice of reason saying, either call it an advert and deliver it like an advert, or call it content and pull back on the advertising. But it's easy to do internally when you haven't got, you there.
I think particularly as well, it's harder for SMEs because while I don't want to paint them all with the same brush, but the budgets they are working with are often a lot smaller. And so that content has to work either a lot harder or has to serve multiple purposes. And there are occasions where it does have to be a broad awareness piece. You'll come across through a social post or searching or whatever, but then it needs to have that conversion element. So I think if you are putting sort of lead gen forms or conversion forms, whatever on it, it needs to be done in a way that matches with the piece and doesn't jar. And you need to think about that user experience right from the very top, right down to the sort of final conversion, how that should flow, and make sure there aren't any giant leaps that people need to take, because those giant leaps are the places where people think, it's not worth the payoff. I won't do it. There needs to be some kind of clear value exchange at each step of the way in order to sort of hold people's hands nicely through the experience and not drag them along.
Is it quite odd for you, because you're almost like an agency but client side, where you're like in-house but not?
Yeah, it is a little odd. I have been pure agency side as well, and it poses a different set of challenges, because when you're agency side, you are effectively working purely for the brand and creating assets that will then be disseminated out over a wide space. And so the way you look to create assets is slightly different versus I have my guardrails at a publisher. I know that I've got these channels. I know that these things are acceptable on the channels. I know these are the standards for them. So it's kind of tipping it on its head a bit. You still get the full creative freedom of working with a load of different brands. And actually, I quite relish that, because you get to work with different people and no 2 days are the same. But you kind of have a nice set of swim lanes you have to stay in. So it is slightly different. It's a slightly different approach, but certainly the skills cross both sides, I guess.
Yeah, I always think that the advantage of working with different brands, whether or not that's agency side, consultancy side, or whether or not that's kind of like what you are, which is almost like a hybrid, you learn quickly because you are seeing what works. You can almost immediately start implementing that with other clients when you've seen, obviously not in a copy and paste way, but I suppose in the sense of you can sort of see approaches that worked really well.
Absolutely. One of the things we're all about is data-fueled creativity, and we talk about that quite a lot. And that's not saying very specific data points are ensuring that this pixel is here, although it can be that. It's more about taking learnings from what we're doing and applying it. So we are ever evolving and ever making our product more relevant to the audience, more resonant and more performance orientated for the advertisers, so they get more out of it. And we have a whole large team at CNN dedicated to ensuring we are learning from what we're doing, and we're not just putting something out there, and we're closing the loop, if you like, and taking the learnings from one and feeding it into our next strategy. So we are constantly refining our product, I guess.
what does that look like then? So, in practical terms, is that sort of like sessions that you kind of wash up, or?
Yes, there's certainly those. There's all sorts of forms of data points we have, and various sort of dashboards we have that allow us to look at performance. And then we have a team that will sort of add a layer of analysis over the top that we can take in. I think it's always difficult with content, because when you're working for an auto brand versus working for a foreign trade body, you can't really compare the two, but there are sort of there are similarities and things you can pull out in terms of, actually, while you may be talking about two very different things, the audience might be quite similar. So what's working there, you can see in terms of platforms, what's sort of working and resonating on that. Is it getting the product message in, or a message in the first 5 seconds, or do you need to entice people in and the payoff comes further down the line? So there are certainly sort of insight we can draw. I think another part as well is it's not unheard of, but we rarely do just one piece for a client. It's normally a series of either articles or videos or what have you. And learning throughout that process, it's important that we don't just wait until the end of the campaign once we've run 5 different articles to see what worked. It's doing it at each stage, so the outcome of one can impact another, and so we're evolving throughout the campaign as well.
I think sometimes buyers think that refusing to do one-offs is a sales choice, but it's really not. It's almost pointless, isn't it? Like, take this podcast, if we'd done a single like advert at the beginning, it's going to miss like 99% of the audience. Whereas if we said, right, let's do 6 over the next 6 podcasts, you're much more likely to reach people. Absolutely.
I think as well, the lifespan of a piece of content is relatively short, and I need to caveat that with a whole bunch of things. The lifespan of a piece of content, certainly I think on a publisher's site, is, and it will vary publisher to publisher, but there's only so many times you can show the audience the same thing. When you're on a site that has a constantly evolving news cycle, and if you go on now, the site will be different to if you went on 5 minutes ago. Having the same piece there just stands out quite dramatically. So you need to ensure that you have a nice cadence of publishing throughout to keep the audience's attention.
Yeah, it's people's attention span just generally online is just poor.
Oh, mine's seeped offline as well. I have 0 attention span now. It's really a problem.
So in people messaging you, we need to get the headline in really quickly. Don't put too much crap in that email.
Absolutely. I wouldn't go that far. I'll have a bit of a read. As long as it's interesting. I was once told the best way to communicate with me is be brief, be bright, and be gone. And it kind of does kind of stand true.
As in, that's the best way to communicate with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is what I'm here. This is what I want. This is how you can solve it. Great, done. This makes me sound like a horrible tyrant. Yeah. I'm really not. But
that sounds like you had
maybe edit that bit out.
No, let's keep that in. One of the things I think you've said that's a really key takeaway for me is this idea that I think even brands should do this. So in-house is this sense of like maybe looking for what other things people are interested in. So even if you're a tech company, and you're creating your own content, it's about not necessarily just creating tech content. What else are those people going to be interested in that you can pull back to your brand?
True. And I think it comes back to where you are talking about in the sort of life cycle of the customer. If you are looking at acquisition, that's a great way to do it. If you are looking at things further down the line, actually some slightly more utilitarian content is going to be right. It also depends how, again, the channel, how people are discovering your content. If SEO or PPC is a large part of what your sort of marketing mix is, ensuring that you are having functional content that meets those search criteria, because that can be as equally valuable. It doesn't always have to be an entertaining story that sort of takes you on an emotional journey, and at the end you're left crying and smiling all at the same time. Sometimes just saying, this is what you're looking for, this is the solution, can work.
Sure. I feel like it's a whole other conversation, but I'm going to ask it in one single question instead. You're welcome. You'll be like, when it comes to SEO now, when you're looking at content, how much are you guys considering it?
From a CNN side, it is a factor. However, I feel certainly for me and my team, and I must say I'm speaking on behalf of the brand studio here, not on behalf of the editorial team, as they are a completely separate team. From a brand studio perspective, we look more at technical SEO, purely down to ensuring our sites are functional, and the nature of our business is we're not overly concerned with natural search. It is important, but it's not our sort of our first and foremost concern. One of the things I've always said, and this sort of stems back to my time at Publicis, and my team there grew out of an SEO team and then became much more of a broader content marketing team, is good copy and SEO are not normally the best bedfellows. We've all come across things online where you've Googled something, you think, oh, that's the answer. And you think, who wrote this? Did it, like, what is this? And it's just stuff with keywords and stuff with things in order to garner that search traffic. And obviously Google works very hard in order to changing their algorithm to make it more sort of appealing to humans. But from a copy perspective, a beautifully told story is not necessarily the most optimized for SEO. There is a balancing act as well, but I think, like I say, a lot of the technical SEO is where we place our focus. So it is important, but I wouldn't put necessarily a need of SEO over the need of telling a story that resonates for people. I
also think, like, that keyword stuffing is such an outdated approach now, isn't it? Like,
really is. Yeah.
It's just if you're still doing that, then I don't know. Like you say, get a good copywriter maybe instead, and try selling a story more. It's just
absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been so interesting to understand about your kind of weird and wonderful role, but also for you to share that knowledge around content and development, all that kind of stuff with us.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
What a way to start a Monday, hey?
What a way to start a Monday.
And now I'm going to have to think loads about podcasts, because you've got that in my brain as well. Like, what am I doing here? But no, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And there's just so many takeaways there. So it's really, really useful.
Well, thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Marketing Forum podcast. If you are not already, please do like and subscribe. And you can follow us on social media or subscribe to our mailing list to find out more about episodes coming your way soon.